What's up, party people? This is Chris Derose, and you're listening to Keyword Crypto.
That was a great intro.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll just keep it. All right. So last week we had Jackson Palmer on the show, Chris. I don't know. Have you ever met Jackson before?
I'm pretty sure I've brushed elbows with him, but no, not otherwise.
Okay. So Jackson relatively recently got pretty fed up with crypto and Twitter and pretty much rage quit. He says it wasn't as much rage as usual, but he even wrote a Python script to delete all of his followers so that he could keep his Twitter account so he could continue to follow what's going on in crypto. But that was his sort of capitulation from the whole scene. And since you're on Twitter very little, you kind of interact with the crypto community very little, and it usually has nothing to do with crypto. So I wanted to know, what's that been like for you, and why'd you do it? Why was there some sort of trauma, or was it just I'm over this?
Yeah, great question. As far as Jackson Palmer's sentiment, I get that. The Twitter experiment is not exactly complete, and I suspect it's going to need some overhaul in its design and setup. But what kind of happened is we put all these people in one room. They all started shouting fragments of conversations, and this great display of these moral pylons started happening. People started flocking in packs and chirping, very much in the nature of the site, I would say, in its branding, together and identifying kind, then sussing out differences of the kind, and these weird sort of meteorological patterns started to kind of happen from my vantage point. In any case, I remember the individual being significantly greater part of the early days of Twitter than now. And now it seems like the collectivism is really a big part of Twitter. But I don't know. I think anyone listening to this might disagree with that. And it's a purely subjective assessment. From Jackson Palmer's point of view, I don't know. I didn't hear that interview, and I probably I want to now, so I'll go back and listen to it. But I get that. What is it that you do there? You show up, and then the first thing people want, I think, is some degree of popularity. So now they have to conform, maybe, or they can add something new. Which in the early days, adding something new was, in my estimation, appreciated. But now it seems like it gets vetted for deviance, and if it's too deviant, then you don't get any love, and you just kind of talk to yourself, I guess, which is fine. But then you're kind of compelled into these herd movements. Yeah, I don't know. The whole thing got kind of weird. So I get his sentiment.
The Jackson didn't just quit Twitter. He quit his YouTube channel. He kind of stopped being a crypto pundit. So he pretty much quit crypto. I think on this show, most of our interaction is through Twitter. So we often talk about Twitter as if it's part of our crypto. But he actually now he doesn't talk about it. He said he doesn't have any more friends. He says when he does talk to somebody about crypto now, it's kind of weird and refreshing because they don't know who he is. So do you get any of that now, or are you just kind of out of it?
No, totally get that. Cause I don't do much crypto stuff lately. And then locally, on my Nextdoor community, I've been more active on Nextdoor. I like Nextdoor a lot. I invested in Nextdoor.
Yeah, we should talk about that. That's interesting.
So on Nextdoor, crypto comes up every once in a while. People don't necessarily know me that side of my life. And so I it is refreshing.
I don't think about that. Yeah.
But the online world in general is doing.
Why'd you invest in Nextdoor? I mean, Nextdoor seems like it's just a smaller population of Twitter people who just talk shit on Nextdoor.
Yeah,
it's a bunch of boomers talking about.
My thesis is roughly this. Now, first off, I don't have any private equity experience really, so this is my first time trying that, and I wanted some private equity exposure in my basket. So I was like, okay, I understand Nextdoor, and given the options available to me, this seems like one of the better ones. So I'll go ahead and start this process, which I did, and it wasn't that hard. In any case, I think that the idea in the Nextdoor blockchain is that right now the market is restricted to accredited investors only. But my hope is that the SEC relaxes that restriction, which they've been talking about doing. And if they do relax the restriction, my hope is that you have this community that is already primed by way of their participation in Nextdoor to recognize the brand and then themselves invest in the Nextdoor blockchain. So at that time, the market will increase. There'll be more demand given the same supply. So at that time, I can either sell to them or I could just keep on holding and see if it goes public, I suppose, if I like the company. But
and what's the reason or what's the need for a blockchain for that?
well, I'm using blockchain sarcastically, maybe. Everything is a blockchain at this point, so I just assume
Okay.
I assume the Nextdoor is a blockchain.
There's no Nextdoor.io. It's not an actual blockchain.
Okay, well then maybe that's the distinction. But it's very much like a what is the Larimer project? Just had
EOS,
issues.
yeah.
No,
EOS,
not EOS. It's more of
Steam.
Steam. It's the Steam play. It's the Steam play. You have
okay.
you have a bunch of content creators.
You can never delete a post ever again.
No, it's not that. It's that you have a group. You have like the sort of milieu of Nextdoor that exists creating content. Given the opportunity to invest, my hope is that they will invest in the system. So that's my thinking on the matter. It could be a bunk theory. I don't know. It's not that much money I put in, but
when you talk about investing in the system, you're talking about just using Nextdoor, right?
well, no, buying Nextdoor tokens, shares in this case. So like
shares.
So my hope would be that I mean,
you're buying and trading Nextdoor. Well, there's no stock for Nextdoor. It's not public, right?
It's private equity, so you have to go through channels. Right. It's not that hard to get into. Well, the round closed, so maybe now, but so you can look into the private equity market's interesting. It's like it's not as liquid as blockchain, but it's the same kind of things. And unlike blockchain, there's like capital inflow that is at least conceivably not directly tied to investment. So like, Nextdoor has ads, for example. So it's a very,
Were you, was crypto your first venture into investing, or were you investing way before?
I was investing way before. In my teenage years, my first job, like real job, it was during the .com boom at online, what now is onlinetrading.com. And so I've been around like boiler rooms and stock market stuff since I was 17, I'd say.
Okay. I just thought it was interesting how you were talking about investing in Nextdoor in terms of blockchain and crypto, and maybe that's because this is a crypto podcast.
Yes, I'm catering it to the audience here. Exactly.
Well, nice. Well, best of luck with that venture.
Well, we were talking about what's his face, Jackson Palmer.
Yeah.
Should we get back to that?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because you seem to have pulled away from. I don't see you on Twitter as much anymore.
Or in crypto at all. I don't see you jumping on any YouTube shows either.
Well, I'm in private channels. I mean, the thing is that like there's this, I don't know if it's decadence or like decay or just maybe it's me, but it's like the same pattern over and over and over and over again. And then after the sort of determinism of the game sets in, it's hard for me to really engage for the nth time, knowing that the winning move is like, left. But I don't really want to go left because that like increases the stupidity of everybody around me and myself. Or I could just kind of like leave it alone and let it run itself. Let the next guy do it. Like the next guy's just going to do it, and then that's fine. So so be it. Like the winning move is kind of not to play.
Sounds like you're getting old, dude.
I know.
It's either that or you just like once you get crypto omnipotence, it's kind of like just boring. Like you can see, it's like you can see the Matrix, and it no longer is a game you want to play anymore, I guess. Well,
there's definitely that in crypto. I mean, yeah, you've got like varying like archetypes of participants here, and I have to say, like the level of wherewithal is just lower and lower and lower. when we started, there was like a lot more of a celebration of independence, like the independent person who was maybe a libertarian trope, but nonetheless like wanted to have like some like idea, like knowledge acquisition part of their life that this was going to fill. Like they were out there on a quest to understand how like money works, or they're part of the quest to do the thing that somehow this might be a tool in. And now the collectivism has kind of like reduced that side of the space, and it's just like you join to be part of this confidence huddle, and it's the dogmas and the sort of like the Bitcoin bromides are relentless. So I guess, yeah, maybe I'm getting older. I don't know.
What did you
No, it
expect?
doesn't seem like anybody's growing. No, like doesn't seem like anybody at any point grows in this space, like emotionally,
Well, not only that, but
intellectually.
yeah, I agree. But not only that, if you do, you get cast out. Like I saw
Yeah.
like I saw like just today, I guess, like Bitcoin Airlog was doing like a roll call of like fallen heroes, and I was looking at some of these guys, and I'm like, every one of those guys may be a fallen hero, but they're a fallen hero because they wanted to do the next thing, and maybe it was maligned or maybe it wasn't, but like to not be a fallen hero, all you have to do is like nothing. That's
What
not
is a
exciting.
fallen hero? What is a fallen hero in crypto? You're talking about just people who are not around anymore, like a Jackson Palmer?
It was his proposed moniker, but I think so. Yes, as anybody who has fallen out of favor with the Hive. And by the way,
Yeah.
the way to
Get
fall out of
canceled.
favor, canceled. Exactly. The way to get falling out of favor is to have like a new idea. And the way to be a hero at this point is to kick somebody out. So it's very masturbatory in my mind.
Yeah, yeah, it's true.
So, I mean, but what were your expectations about crypto? I mean, you wanted mass adoption, right? Or did you just want this to be an exclusive club? And if it was meant to grow, what would have been the more interesting way for it to happen? I guess more people would bring more ideas and creativity.
Well, crypto isn't dead. Like I don't think that it's a failed project. I do think Bitcoin is on its way to being a failed project, unfortunately.
Yep.
But I
You
don't
heard
think
it
crypto
here
is.
first.
Yeah.
That's what we created.
Chris
this
Derose
podcast
says
to talk
Bitcoin
about.
dead.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
I chose those words fairly specific. It's on it. I think it's on its way. I don't know it, but I can give very specific reasons why. It's here's the thing: is that like if we don't defend the castle, we don't deserve to keep it. So if you don't like hearing that, then do something. Don't sit there and kick the guy out for saying the thing you don't want to hear, which is what's
Exactly.
probably going to happen.
I just retweeted Andreas's defense of why he wrote a book on Ethereum. That he went on YouTube and said what he got a letter from somebody saying, why are you doing this, promoting Ethereum? This is not what you should be doing. And he went on YouTube to basically say, I'm interested in blockchain and the things that push the limit. And I think it's pretty crazy. We talk about it all the time on this show, but the fact that we've got this, we're supposed to be challenging ideas, and it seems like that's a faux pas in the community to do that.
Yeah.
It's
too bad.
disappointing.
Well, and then this is like kind of like a douchey thing to say, but I try to say it as often as possible, which kind of makes me kind of douchey. But anytime somebody says should, I'm like, there's a 7-year-old.
Oh
because
yeah.
Because should is what you want in your perfect little dream world. It doesn't deal with reality. There either is or isn't. Should is you putting your bullshit onto somebody else and telling them that if they don't do what you want, then they're wrong.
Very well said.
Because it's not should for them, it's should for you. And it's a fucking selfish word.
Right. So there's a lot of should in crypto right now.
And there's
a lot of shit, specifically in the Bitcoin community.
And how? Yeah. I mean, Michael brought up something in the last episode also, or maybe it was the previous one, where you said that one of your favorite crypto projects, you really want somebody to attack it so it actually gets tested. And I think that sentiment is what we need a lot more of. It's like, come and attack me so we can see how strong this is, or whatever. And it's like when you don't do that, when you don't have a forum where that can happen, you just have a religion. That's all.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, you asked me what I think Bitcoin. You asked me what I think Bitcoin like. I think you did use the word should. I mean, should itself is not necessarily. It's how you use it. But Like
Sure.
coming from a position of like how Bitcoin perhaps um, might have been. I think what I would have seen in the space was something like the other decentralized projects. Like people forget that we do have a path that we could have followed towards success that is in this like decentralization sphere, and and we even started to go down it like in a lot of ways, and then frankly, like as core kind of like became dogmatic, we gave up on that stuff. But BitTorrent is a predominant standard for dispatching data in a peer-to-peer way. There's an association, there is a committee, there is a panel, there's a government that maintains the standard. I think I would have seen us doing something more like that. Unfortunately, we've sort of like attracted to this space people who are completely antithetical to any form of leadership. Which is, I mean, that's what's going to be on the Bitcoin
Yeah.
tombstone. Like, here lies no
Right.
leaders. Like that's this. That's
Yeah.
what happened. That's what the story will be, and it'll be
But
very
what I
sad.
think is funny is that Bitcoin has kind of molded itself into the United States government, where you have three branches of government. You have the miners, you have the people who run nodes, and you have the devs. So you have the three branches, and then without a president that you elect every 4 years to kind of set the tone for the direction of the project, it just kind of flounders. Like
Well,
that's
yeah,
and
there's
when you have a
yeah,
bad president in
Yeah,
America and
maybe.
you don't
Yeah.
have any direction, it just kind of flounders. Nothing ever gets done.
Hmm. It's interesting.
And
yeah. No,
so
that's
it's
Interesting
really
very
point of
well
important to
view.
said.
have a central leader, but it's good to have the person get voted in and out. And you don't have, you have term limits and this and that. And then it allows, because the devs and the miners and the devs, it's really difficult for them to agree on stuff all the time. But also at the same time, it's it's kind of the whole thing of like the U.S. government's so big, it's very hard to turn, and it has these slow incremental changes. Same thing after 10 years or 11 years of Bitcoin now. It's like it's very difficult to get a lot of change. But when you don't have any kind of voice powering through, like you said, no leaders, it's just
Hmm.
kind of stagnant and
I
just kind of sits
wonder.
there.
We also
Maybe.
have no there's no like responsibility either in the sense that like so and so is presenting as an expert. He's thought to be an expert, and we are going to test his expert opinion in such and such a way. And if this person succeeded, then we can use that as part of our next iteration of planning. And if they failed, then we will find somebody perhaps that has a better record or something like that. And it's not a coincidence that I see this a lot of places in social groups online now. We have like these like template cultures, or really
Yeah.
simulacrums, probably like in the Baudrillian term, where you have a group of people who are primed to have an expectation. They then are found in need of a group expectation, and then they use the one they've been primed for. So it's not a coincidence. We saw that
What's
with
it?
we
What's
saw that with like the gold meme. Like they were
right?
primed to have this gold expectation, and lo and behold, like people then started articulating the gold like properties of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And the same was true for smart contracts with Ethereum. Like it's almost like to enter, you have to agree to this meme, and then you agree to the meme, and then you go in there, and then they're like, oh, okay, there's chaos. What should we use for footing? And then it's like, well, we agree to the meme, and then they continue it. But it's not to say that there's anything more than the meme. It really was just like an interface to get in the door.
I
But
mean,
it's
you've
not to
literally
say
just
that's what you will
explained
have.
Lightning Network
Well,
Yeah,
to
I
a
maybe.
mean,
T. It's the first person who came out with something, and then everybody just said, "Okay, we're going to do that." And then,
yeah.
as much chaos as happens, they're like, "No, no, no, we're still doing that." Like nobody adapts, nobody adjusts, nobody like, "Hey, this doesn't work. Let's do something else." Nope, nope, nope. This is the meme. We're
Yeah.
sticking with it.
Yeah, or
It's like,
there's even like you can get even more microscopic with it. Like if you have something to say in your community, whatever that community is, it's like you either agree with the meme or you're making your own meme and everyone will follow it or not follow it. But I can kind of see how that would be a pattern. Like I don't know. Whatever that thing is. Like this podcast was, we were questioning Bitcoin and other cryptos. And like that was kind of the meme from the beginning, or sort of. It's not a meme like Lightning Network is, but it's something that people either can follow and they can say, "Oh, this is Bitcoin is not going to work in the end. That's what we're looking for. That's what the answer that we're looking for, and we're either going to find it or not. I don't know if that makes any sense at all. To me, it does.
No,
Yeah, but like
other
we've adapted though. That's the thing. Like we don't
Oh, that's true.
we don't care if it succeeds or not. Like we want to know.
Oh, okay, good point.
What's wrong
So
with it? Like we're not picking winners or losers.
I wonder if some people who listen to the show or our followers would agree with that, or if they just want to see that thing, or
Yeah.
hey, nano guys, how's it going? It's like I wonder, and I hope that all of our listeners are super open minded about being wrong. I guess.
Yeah.
As part of it.
Another
Well,
part of all
Chris-
this stuff too, I'd say, like while you're on the subject, is like there's a similar story in a lot of these internet properties. The property being loosely defined. So let's say like Bitcoin's a property, Twitter's a property. Nextdoor, let's not use Nextdoor because it's too new. But there's this heritage in the internet of educated young people arriving online, and Facebook is probably a good property in this sense. Educated young people arriving online to build their community. And when you have already selected for this demographic of bright young people, great things are very much possible without that much control or supervision, let's say, because people are, educated. But time has gone on now, and the kinds of people on the internet are drastically uneducated compared to how it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And
Yes.
so these rules,
Boomers.
Really?
yeah, boomers are an easy example. Just like the dregs, like we see these people that are like, I don't know how you describe them other than that.
Could
but
you say deplorables?
I could say deplorables. I'm not going to. I could. But yeah, there's almost like so like there's people online now that you just never saw 20 years ago. I remember, like you go
Yeah.
online,
Well,
Yeah.
and
of
there
course,
was like
there was barely any people online 20 years. I mean,
Right.
there was, compared to what we have now. So
Right,
that
so-
makes sense.
So like you think of like the goals of like Torrent or something like 20 years ago, and people are like, yeah, this is gonna be great. We're gonna have great music, and no one's gonna be a dick about it, except for where the record companies are suck. And then now you get on here, and then like people are like taking that opportunity to put like, I don't know, like Nazi rally speeches in what you thought was like a good music single, and then you download it, and it's like, who the fuck did this to us?
Yeah.
And it's the kind of stuff you
Or
don't think about.
viruses, yeah.
Or viruses, right? Exactly. It's the kind of stuff we don't think about when we have like this nice, well manicured garden of like attendees, and then when it opens the floodgates to like anybody, and the miscreants start to just pollute everything. And it starts a little bit at first, and then before you know it, it just compounds. And like that same cultural impact happened, I think, on Facebook. It happened on Twitter. Jackson Palmer's probably testifying to that, on all his sites. And the same thing is true with Bitcoin. So like there has to be a sort of like exodus, I think, from these communities by the people who are adding the most value over time.
Maybe that's
So I guess so
test we
and
need,
not
I guess.
to push back too hard because I don't want to like question your investments, but how is Nextdoor going to be different than that?
They may not be, but like that's okay, because like I'm not here to like make the world a better place. I'm here to make money. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Derose 2020. I'm not here to make the world a better place. I'm here to make money. Well, let's see. How have you? I'll slightly change the subject, but how have you adapted over the years with Bitcoin Uncensored as your show? What non-Bitcoin projects were you into that you opened your mind to, that you closed your mind to, and how did that develop? I mean,
well, I think I was here to create a better place. I mean, we're taking it there. I mean, there was a time when I was here to create a better place. I think. I've read. There's a piece that I put up that everyone should read. It's a good 26-page piece. I don't even think it's true.
everyone should read my piece.
No, it's not my piece. It was another piece.
It's a piece you put up.
Yeah,
There's this thing I did that everyone should pay attention to.
I put up this piece. Everyone should read it.
Here, I'll look for it. Maybe I'll find it here. But
It's only
Yeah,
26
no,
pages,
so
and,
you
and
came-
I'm pretty solid in this 26 page paper.
So really quickly, for anybody who doesn't know Bitcoin Uncensored and they don't know you, you had a YouTube channel and was it a podcast too? I only know the
yes,
YouTube channel
it was
basically.
podcast before it was the YouTube, and then it became the both.
Podcast
Yeah.
and then YouTube, you were the host of Bitcoin Uncensored, which how would you describe that project?
I mean, it started as like it was a journey. It started as me and John Seth putzing around, and then like this Bitcoin thing took off, which was weird. Like it's easy for everybody now to know what a Bitcoin podcast was, but when this started, it was just two fucking goofballs with a microphone.
Yeah.
You know.
But were you doing it because you wanted to teach people about it, or were you just were you trying to increase the value of your investments?
I was doing it because it was fun, and I wanted to have more fun,
There you
and
go.
and then it became like just a whole. It became like a coming of age, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah.
So back to your growth journey.
Yes. So I
Okay,
guess
so this 26 page paper you didn't write, but you posted it because you thought it was important for people to read.
yeah, I'm actually I loaded it now. It's like a seminal work. It was written I think in the 70s. In some ways, like it might be like an eye roller for anybody who's like a history in like academia. Because it's sort of like the rise and fall of nations and the pattern that we see over and over again in like the Turkish Empire, the Greeks, etc. Yeah, the piece is called "The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival" by Sir John Glubb, and it was written in
And
'76.
we'll put the link in the description below.
And
guys.
again, easy read. 26 pages, very easy read, and it sort of shows how communities rise and fall. And I think there's a lot of online parallels there too. And like it's a little spooky because you read it and you're like, shit, that sounds like America, like a not like a late stage capitalism kind of reference, but like a late stage like civilization reference. Yeah, but it could just be like an interest. But in any case, it does seem like it has a lot of truth to it in the online space. And so I see like in the earlier stages, there's like a sense of duty that people have to their community. Like the Bitcoin community, it was a group. So like the sense of community is very strong. And then over time, it sort of perverts and gives way to a sense of financial gain. And there's a few things that go with that are explained in the piece. But basically, the incentives fail. Society no longer like affirms good behavior. So that it just sort of creates a snowball where like, a few people start and then before you know it, everybody is in. And then you end up in this sort of despair where it's like every man for himself. And like a cycle has to begin again where a new community will spring from the ashes of, what is basically a looting of the treasury from the last society. So I would actually expect that would probably happen in Bitcoin, candidly.
So I have this theory about capitalism and how it's completely unsustainable without slave labor or
Here we
low low wage labor. Because if you look at every kind of capitalist society that
You already got my
succeeded,
attention. Yeah.
it had slaves or indentured servants or some kind of low paid or no paid labor to build their economy. And then once the economy got to a certain point, the slaves or the low paid laborers stood up and demanded more. And then the capitalist society kind of collapsed and turned into like a social democratic society. So just historically, Spain, France, England.
It also
Not
takes
sure
a lot
about
of
the
time.
Romans.
It takes a lot of
And
time.
this is over hundreds of years, over the process. But like there is no capitalist society that was capitalist 300 years ago that's still capitalist now, like 100% capitalist, right?
Right.
What does 100% capitalist mean?
There's no such thing.
Okay. So what are we talking about? Like,
Well, when I think of 100%, for whatever it's worth, when I think of 100% capitalist, I'm thinking of like no state programs and like minimal tax collection, middle to no tax
A
collection.
libertarian dream.
Yeah, libertarian dream.
that-
That's really what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Exactly.
does that
Yeah.
exist anywhere right now in the world? Is there an island that functions that way? Maybe a community or something. But there's no countries that are.
It's probably
Not
going to be
that
like
I'm
the
aware of.
FARC, and they're like a communist group, oddly, but like it would be.
Yeah.
I would think it would be some like rebel group, or maybe if you looked in like Africa, something like that would be my guess.
Okay.
Where there's no like
That's
they
what we're
usually
talking
cover like healthcare and all that kind of stuff. Like they cover
probably with their
doctors.
slavery, by the way. Like Like so
Yeah.
that you have like
I have an
some.
issue with words like capitalism and socialism because I feel like people are often arguing about what is the best way to run your country, and for me, it's all about who owns the means of production. That's kind of what the defining factor is. Because otherwise, when you're talking about having a government with programs, with socialized programs, but a free market, it's just varying degrees of that. So
Yeah.
so what are the definition that we're talking about right now? Let's get into this. When you say
Definition of what?
of
What do you mean?
capitalism or socialism, what is it? What are we talking about
The,
when you
the
say
other
that?
weird thing
Well,
with capitalism, I would suggest, is that capitalism is often it started as an accusation, so it was like a slur. So
yeah.
Karl Marx kind of defined it in this way, and then it took off almost in like the spirit of reclamation. So so like think of like the N word and how like what is it to be the N word, and then like that's an awkward conversation. But it started off as an accusation, and then it got reclaimed, and now presumably you can talk to somebody who will tell you. But capitalism has a similar heritage, and it's sort of the etymology of the word.
Yeah, because that's striking. That's scarily true because the N word used to not be a slur. It used to just mean a black man from Africa.
Right.
And then the white supremacists turned it into a slur, and then it evolved into a slur. Just like faggot used to mean something non-pejorative, and now it's a pejorative.
Right.
Just means, so it's like so supremacists and just assholes and trolls take just a bland word and they turn
So
it into a complete pejorative, a complete slur. So
okay, so getting back to like your political definition and your theory on capitalism, Michael, you're talking about your theory is based on a hypothetical. Is that what you're saying?
So if we have capitalism on one side and socialism on the other side,
Which we're
pretty much
defining
every
by who owns the means of production, like that's what it comes down to. Because otherwise, they're both kind of very similar to me
well,
in
one
terms
is
of
privately owned means of production without a lot of government oversight, and one is public means of production, publicly owned means of production with more oversight, with let's say 100% oversight. And so you're never going to have 100%. You're never going to reach one extreme or the other extreme. So you're always going to be somewhere in the middle. And so the U.S. is probably the furthest leaning towards capitalism than any other country. We have, the worst healthcare in the world, more or less, of any developed nation. We have the worst schools of any developed nation. We have, because like the least amount of public schools, the least amount of public healthcare. We have the least amount of workers' rights, even though
right.
we're the ones who created May Day and all that stuff.
Okay, so the
And
U.S. is very on
so
that capitalist side
we
of the
lean,
spectrum.
yeah. So you can't get, so the closer and closer and closer you get to pure capitalism, the only way to sustain that is through slavery or through immigrant labor or through yada, yada, yada.
And so
So
your theory is that eventually the socialist programs come out of the need to deal with the uprising of the people who have been taken advantage of. Is that it?
correct. The only way to sustain it is to continue to allow immigrants into the country who are willing to work for low to no wage and willing to live 10 people in a room type thing.
Well, we've
Does Bitcoin
also
fix this?
we've also exported the need to import immigrants in a lot of ways too. Like that maybe just complicates things. But whereas we used to do manufacturing here, we now do that elsewhere. And the slaves, if you will, are working at the Nike factories in like Malaysia now. So we've been able to outsource a lot of that, I
Exactly.
think. But I don't know if that confuses your point or validates it. But that maybe,
No, it validates it because what happens
yeah.
is as soon as that labor leaves, the people who are left are like, whoa, we need to get paid. And those jobs that used to be decent wage laborers, now they're being replaced by next to nothing slave laborers. So the people who are here who can't leave, who aren't mobile, are like, fuck you, I need to pay rent. And they start electing officials who are saying, okay, well, we'll give you rent subsidies. We'll guarantee you $15 an hour. We'll make sure your tuition's paid for through tax dollars. we'll tax the corporations that are sending the jobs overseas, and that's the punishment. And so I think that's just the natural cycle with every single country, every single dynasty. In the past 1,000 years, they're all pretty much. I mean, like Rome was one of the most socially, like doesn't Rome have, or doesn't Italy have the highest amount of paid vacation out of any Western country, developed nation?
I don't know if that's true.
So,
Might be.
I mean, I think it's just the natural movement is towards socialism. But then my question, I guess the main question, the hypothesis is, does that mean you're more civilized or less? Because libertarians feel like they're oppressed, and it's a lack of civilization because they're being oppressed and they're being stolen from.
When I
And
think
I'm
of
like,
civilized, I think it is more of a cultural reference. So like the
Yeah, me too.
less innate culture you have, probably the more civilized you are. So like if you don't have like any ethnic influences, like I have no idea what my ethnic influences are. It's like just lost basically. Well, yeah, mostly. So like that would make me civilized. Whereas if I had come off of like an island where I practice voodoo, I guess, then I would have this like ethnic component. Does that help in this? So like I think
That's
modernity. Yeah, I don't know. You get into like some colonization kind of thing in there, where like the function of the state is effectively to like remove your ethnic influence and to assimilate you into like a common culture, and
yeah. What is civilization?
but then it becomes its own culture. Like Italy is its own culture, France is its own culture,
not
Spain is its
necessarily.
own culture.
Italy's culture exists as a reference to its past, I suppose. Um, yeah, I don't know. That's
Everyone's culture, yeah. I mean, I
not
mean, you
everyone.
lose
No,
you.
like
No, I'm saying is like you lose the majority and you become the plural. You become the plurality. It's like it just becomes one melting pot of culture, and like
yeah.
that's the new culture, and it's different than France's culture because they have their own melting pot, and they have their own history and their own immigrants that came in. And
I don't know how
Mm.
true that is though, because I'm thinking about it. These are great questions. I could probably look some of this stuff up in one of my books, but
They are good questions. This is very like armchair intellectual stuff right here. So we have a podcast and we're going to solve the world's problems.
but it makes me think about Bitcoin in the sense of you have all these people from coming from different cultures, and they're kind of forced because of the Bitcoin meme of our way or the highway. This is the way. This is the one true coin. This is the one true coin that will rule them all, type thing. And you have all these different people from all these different cultures. They come in and they have to adopt to this, or they're not allowed in. You have to
I
prescribe to the
yeah,
cult like
I see it.
motto, the screed, or you're not allowed in.
I actually you're right, Michael. I totally agree with that. But I also see the relation of this to crypto is that crypto is kind of a big analog or experiment to experiment with how we use government, because that's really what it is how are we going to make decisions as a group of people. Well, let's create this thing that we all want or need, and then no one person is in charge of it. Let's figure out how we come to a conclusion, and it asks that question of how are you going to govern, and asks it to people who otherwise wouldn't have thought about that before. That's how I relate it to crypto. But you're right. We do have this dogmatic thing that is very much prevalent in politics at large. When people talk about their politics, it's almost like they're talking about their religion. Even the
yeah,
words like capitalism and socialism are trigger words. I mean, they get people
Yeah.
upset, even if people are talking about the same thing. People seem to get upset by those words. I don't know. What do you think, Chris?
no, that's true. I Yeah, no, that's definitely true. I think like markers of Bitcoin culture tend to be, or at least have been in the past, things like I think of Professor Bitcoin, like he was this very uniting cultural artifact that we had for a while, where
Who is
he
Professor Bitcoin? Yeah.
Bitcoin
Bitcorn.
Bitcoin.
Oh, Professor
yes,
Bitcorn.
yes, Professor
Okay.
Bitcoin. A lot of
How,
the Bitcoin cultural tropes are even the bad guys. So you have like Satoshi. Who's the fake Satoshi number one? Satoshi Nakamoto.
No, this is great. Tell us the story, Chris.
The guy, the old man who loved his trains that like decided to talk to the reporter for like a free lunch. That guy.
I don't know this
Dorian.
guy.
Yes, Dorian Nakamoto. There you go, Dorian.
He's been
Dorian,
around
yes.
so much
that's right.
longer.
Yeah.
These are cultural artifacts. And we also have like the older days. You have things like the wizard, the magical internet money wizard, which is like that MS Paint thing that was like a rally. So like these are bits of like contrived culture. I don't know what the cultural artifacts are of late. I'm wondering
Bitcoin,
now.
Your show, Bitcoin Uncensored, was very much you brought a lot of that together, even like the backgrounds that you would throw up, on your green screen or whatever. Often that was all your culture that you were throwing out there.
Yeah, well, there was a handful of memes that we did over the years that ended up that people didn't even know they came from us. That was always very gratifying to me when oftentimes the people who didn't like you were using your content. You're just like, okay, whatever.
I created that dumb joke and now everyone's using it. I feel so proud of myself.
Yeah.
I put sunglasses on a dog.
Right.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So I guess back to the idea of Bitcoin as this fallible governance in a sense, or like fallible state. Like, what do you think the long term? Do you think that Bitcoin will become like the next Italy or France, where it becomes more democratic and more, because there's this really interesting thing that David Gerard posted from the BTC Reddit, which I think is the Bitcoin Cash Reddit, right? Just so weird.
Of course.
About how one of the main devs was leaving because, sorry, I'm just drawing a blank.
He wasn't. They needed payment over there. He wasn't getting paid. If I remember.
Yeah, because it was about the payments, and so he said like this is unsustainable because all the miners are making profit off of all the devs' work who aren't getting paid for it. So that's technically, in essence, slave labor.
Michael, are you talking about the guy who like did the Reddit capitulation article?
Yeah.
So what happened was, as a developer, was he a developer? He was a developer, not a miner.
He was a developer.
He was a developer, and he was getting frustrated with his dream of Bitcoin. He actually went all in on Bitcoin Cash because he thought that was the future of Bitcoin. And he saw that the developers were getting no credit. They were getting no residuals. The miners were basically responsible for the fall of the system because the miners were being lazy and using software that they didn't create. And so
i.e. slave labor.
So he cashed out, basically. He was like, I'm done with this shit. That was actually a pretty interesting article. But that's what you're talking about, Michael.
Yeah, so it goes back to my hypothesis that none of these systems can work when you have low paid labor. Because eventually those laborers are going to stand up and say, what the fuck? You're making all this profit off of my work, and I'm not making any of the profit. This is ridiculous. And it's happened in every single, predominant or major powerhouse country in the world. And it's happening in China now. People are finally standing up and saying, yo, we're doing all this work, and they're fighting back. And so I just don't see how that's to go back to what you were saying, Chris, about Bitcoin, kind of like as a failing community. In my mind, this kind of goes back to that hypothesis of all these devs who are doing all this free work, and you have all these miners who are profiting off of it. And they're like, hey, if we don't get our cut, we're all just going to eventually go somewhere else where we get paid, because that's how the free market works. So I want to get your thoughts on that, Chris.
Yeah, well, in the exchanges as well, I would probably suggest are making lots of money. Yeah, I think that there's a few major problems of Bitcoin that are insurmountable, not least of which is that there is no purpose. There's no shared sense of goal or direction. And the culture has become such that anybody who dares nominate such a position is subject for removal. So we've lost a lot of talent, or a lot of people who would have been talent. The very people who we need the most have zero inclination to risk their livelihood or their reputation for Bitcoin, like the brand, whatever that might be. And to that end, I mean, the Bitcoin brand itself has been like really desecrated. Like you have all these different Bitcoins, Bitcoin Cash being what it is, but also Bitcoin Gold, Bitcoin Classic, Bitcoin
Diamond.
Unlimited, Bitcoin, and it just the leadership vacuum is evident. And we're still what I think will be commonly understood is that this is the leader's project. Like to be Bitcoin is to do what van der Leen says is Bitcoin. Like that's van der Laan, however you pronounce it. That's probably what's going to end up happening. So it wouldn't surprise me if this becomes like the van der Laan project, and then from there it's just going to get awkward. He seems very committed. He's not a bad person. I don't want to like shame him.
Talk about him really fast, so because most people aren't
who is-
going to know who he is.
Yeah, well, it used to be Bitcoin celebrated its leaders. So we celebrated Satoshi first, and then Marty Malmy, and then Garzik, not Garzik. It was what's his name? Gavin, then Garzik, and then all of a sudden that stopped, and then there was no leaders, and that was like an age of darkness, and you were not allowed to talk about the leader. You couldn't praise the leader. You couldn't look to the leader for directions. And really around that time is when it started to get kind of dark in the leadership sense of things. And there's really around that time that the religion started to grow to a level I'd never seen it before until we have it now, where people just believe there is no leader. Like even here, people are like, don't know who van der Laan is. So Bitcoin is created by men. It does not have 79 protons in its nucleus. It was not created by the non-humans. There's a group of men who do it, and there is a hierarchy. The hierarchy is enforced upon these men by GitHub. It is a command by the god of GitHub, I suppose, onto the project maintainer. And the project maintainer is a position. The project maintainer is awarded to van der Laan, VanderLaan, a person who's like sacrificed a lot and who's a good person, but who himself seems to believe that that hiding is the way to lead, I guess. And understandably, people are like vicious to the leader. I get that. But when Gavin's access was it Gavin's access was removed, and then Garzik's access was removed. There was no more transparency really in terms of how decisions were made in a lot of ways. So now, if you try to get close to do things, like it's just awkward and weird. And at the end of the day, van der Laan is the one who makes the decisions. And if he decides it goes in, it goes in. If he decides it doesn't, it doesn't. So like this no leaders thing has kind of regressed to this form of authoritarianism, I think.
It's so interesting. It's so interesting how, I don't know, it's like Bitcoin is like a sandbox to teach anarchists that they need government systems.
Yes.
Or they need like a leader.
Yes.
Anyway,
I agree.
Go on. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. No, yeah. So like, okay, let's say you want to do something with Bitcoin's leadership. Well, now you have to pledge like fealty to the king, which is not going to be like in the form of kneeling at a throne, but like you have to put your time in doing grunt work that is arbitrary, and then you have to hope that somebody like dies, and then you can get a promotion. Like it's just wrought with bureaucracy, as best I can tell. And the overall guiding principle is nil. Like you should aspire to nothing. You should want nothing. Bitcoin is a rock. It will remain in stasis. We won't disturb it. These were things that we were told had to be the case, and we trusted that to be true. And for many of the reasons we were told that had to be the case, it turned out to not be true. So like, a good example of that was Bitcoin can't hard fork, yet we've done it before. Things like the newest CVE, wherein like we have security issues abounding in all these ways, and then we went from like, if you look at the way things were headed, Amir Taki, I believe it was, or was it? Yeah, I think it was Amir Taki, proposed the BIP system at some point, and there was this progression of like a torrent like, or maybe even IETF like model of governance. And when Vanderland took over the scene, that was a kind of censored-ish, like sort of. There was this hiding approach that was taken on, like, and I think per his command, it was like Bitcoin's not going to change. That's the end of that. And I think that was unfortunate in hindsight, and I think that the space really hasn't benefited from that leadership. And I think that ultimately that's going to be like really kind of the end of it for Bitcoin. Not in the sense that like we're all doomed, everything's whatever, but it's just like there won't be a future chapter, there won't be a next thing. What you see is what you get, and if you want the next thing, you're going to have to start a new brand, and that's I think what everybody wants at this point. Bitcoin devs included. I think the Bitcoin devs are like also going to. They may not say it, but they are very sympathetic to the we need to get paid thing, and so like that's also a problem in Bitcoin Core camp, I think, as well.
We were talking about it it's happening with the Nano guys. So like they had
What's up, Nano guys?
What up? They had a dev fund, and it's starting to empty out, and I think they have like 6 months left, and that's a big concern in the community. It's like, what happens when the devs don't have any more money? Does the project just fall on its face? And then JJ was saying he heard through the grapevine that a lot of the BTC devs were actually moving over to BSV just because they've thought about this. I don't know how true that is, but I definitely hear a lot of talk about concern about how do the devs get paid. And this goes back to my whole thing of like, this was kind of, Bitcoin was kind of a libertarian dream because there was no oversight. There was no, like, nobody cared. And the devs were usually kind of the ones who had also a lot of Bitcoin in the early stages. But if you're a new dev coming in, how do you get paid? If you got into Bitcoin last year and you're the super genius, who's paying you? There's nobody there to pay. And so it's like it's like, I think we're starting to get the early stages of the rise of the proletariat, more or less. You know, it's just like, they're going to come up and say like, look, you don't pay us, we don't work. And your whole like reign kind of crumbles.
Agreed.
You get shit for bringing up any like, you know, small project that, you know, to explain the Nano meme is that we often bring up this example of cryptocurrency that, you know, it's like there are so many criticisms of these projects, and actually I'm interested, Chris, through Bitcoin Uncensored, you would talk about, I mean, it wasn't all about Bitcoin, it was about other cryptos too. What smaller projects were ones that you explored, or even I think it was like Counterparty or something was something that you were into. I don't know if you were related to that team or if you were a developer. Were you ever a developer on a crypto?
Not on a crypto, no. Though, yeah. So Counterparty was a project that I was big into, that everybody was big into for a period there.
What is Counterparty? What was it?
Counterparty really was like the Ethereum idea, but with the Bitcoin, and it was a layer on top of Bitcoin that provided a lot of extra features. And it's funny now for me to look back at the project because it was one of those things where like you did the right thing in terms of the community, and then you got thrown under the bus as a result. So Counterparty wanted to offer the features of competitors or would-be competitors to Bitcoiners, and it worked with the network as best it could. It received zero from the Bitcoin devs, who frankly worked against it at all from functioning. Bitcoin would record. I'm sorry, Counterparty would record on the Bitcoin blockchain metadata effectively, in the similar way to like color coins or one of those type of implementations, but with additional features, eventually including preliminary smart contract support for assets using the Counterparty system. The biggest success of Counterparty was the Rare Pepe project, which took off
Right.
and did wonderfully. Which wasn't that different than Ethereum in terms of like the CryptoKitties
I
project.
always
I would
thought that
say
was an Ethereum token. It wasn't. It
no, it
wasn't
was Counterparty.
so that was a smart contract, a counterparty smart. So counterparty. The way you describe counterparty and the shit you got for it is very similar to us bringing up a quote unquote shitcoin like Nano, which is just one that's doing something different and needs to be tested. Counterparty was it its own blockchain? Or was it just something that operated off of Bitcoin and allowed you to do more with it?
The latter, operated off of
Okay.
Bitcoin, let you do more with it. I was the community director. That's how I kind of started off too with some of this stuff. Was that they asked? I was active in the counterparty networks at the time, and they were like, well, "Do you want this position?" I was like, "Sure," and so I took it, and then I started promoting counterparty, and
What
it was fun. Like it was a decentralized exchange. It was one of the first functioning decentralized exchanges. That was really what put it over the top out of the gate. That was way before anybody else had anything like that, and that's really what enabled Rare Pepe. But even prior to Rare Pepe, there's a few games that were using the assets, and so that was really impressive, and I liked that a lot. But Luke Dash Jr. and a few other guys decided it was spam, and just went out of their way to keep it from functioning. And
what was their argument that it was spam, that it was not using Bitcoin the way it was meant to be used?
yeah, I mean these guys over time it started in this way, frankly, where there was like this notion of the pure or the holy relic that is the Bitcoin blockchain. So anything that's not this impure for some arbitrary thing, I guess they wanted to keep the space consumption down, which is fine. But yeah, it wasn't like the core protocol, and it was metadata, and it distorted thus economic incentives. Like this was the rhetoric of the time. So it was an attack on Bitcoin. It's the same thing we see even now, although now it's even more amplified. Back then it was minor. Now it's like using Bitcoin is an attack on Bitcoin. You should be using your credit card. I mean, it just got so absurd over time. But back then we didn't know how it would progress. So that was kind of how that went down. I shouldn't say always. I was very actually that was a lie. I apologize. I was very apprehensive about Monero at first, and over time, I see Monero as probably being the most worthwhile replacement for Bitcoin. Like I would very much think at this point that Bitcoin, if and when it does go down, would see Monero probably take up a lot of the reign from its lead currently. But who knows? I mean, a lot of the performance of Bitcoin has been its liquidity on exchanges, and it may very well be that Monero never gets that liquidity because it's fungible.
What was Monero like? What was Monero like when it first came onto the scene? What made it sketchy besides that it was just anonymous? You just didn't trust it, or
well, the provenance of the project was a little sketchy. The guy who started it wasn't Ricardo, and
it's funny that he gets credit for that somehow.
Ricardo's great. He's done really well. But yeah, he gets credit for spearheading the project, which is, I guess, true to a degree. But he's mostly just a person for the project that's just present. He really isn't that active in the development of it or any of this anymore. He kind of took over. I mean, it was just a failed clone of what was it? A failed clone of? I'm trying to remember the history. It's not fresh in my mind.
It was a clone of something. Okay.
Yeah, it started off as a clone of something with some hacks, and it just kind of was abandoned by the creator, who didn't insta-mine it in the way like Dash did, but there was like allegations that it wasn't fairly distributed, and so Ricardo kind of took it on from there, and I think he took it on from there, and then it did take on a life of its own from Ricardo's lead. Really, it's probably.
But you were skeptical of it. You were like, that was
Well, you gotta, yeah. I mean, that was also at a time when I was also myself like very much of like the maximalist spirit. Like maximalism, I started with me and John Seth, as best I can tell. Like Vital coined it, describing us. Like the thesis
really?
that yeah. I mean, that was
you were the original maximalist then.
I think so. Yeah, I agreed. I apologize. I didn't know what we were going to do.
The monster you
There was a time
created.
when,
It's going
like
to be the
thesis,
title of this show. It's the original Maxi,
yeah,
Derose.
the thesis made enough sense, I think, at the beginning, which was that the federal government was going to regulate these things like securities, and so that the degree to which like any of these things stood a chance was nil, and they were just going to be money grabs, which they mostly have been. But the federal government's like regulatory stance has not been what I expected, so that completely invalidates the thesis, as best I can tell. Now we'll see if that changes, but like this sort of like postmodern like description of blockchain as something other than a company of men has been very successful. So like it should be considered that the sort of regulatory protection that we've received has come from the delusion that this isn't a company of men. Whether or not that persists going forward, I don't know. Like it's very possible that the federal government could say like, no, you know what, a blockchain is just a company, an unincorporated company of men, and that's the end of that. So that could happen.
Versus what, a company of dolphins?
What that's the thing is like what a blockchain has been like hitherto undefinable, and if you try to define it, you get kicked out of a group.
Is it a company, or is it an idea? Is it a software or whatever? I mean, that's not just a question of what is blockchain, but what is any computer program? It actually gets pretty philosophical. But but
well,
as far as how the government's going to regulate it, is it going to be regulated like it's a business or corporation or a company?
Or is it like
I think it's going to get
like a work
regulated.
of art?
I think it's going to get regulated a company. I think what's going to happen is the federal government's going to maintain a roster of ticker symbols to companies. That's what I suspect is going to happen. Or they'll just make this thing illegal is also possible, I suppose.
Which ones, BTC and ETH?
Well, any of them. So like right now we have this sort of regulatory protection in the ignorance. So like what is ETH? And if we don't ask the question or we don't answer the question or both, then ETH is what the exchange decides it is. But at some point, investors are going to sue a major exchange over this issue. And then it'll go to the federal court. And then at some point, I would guess, I don't know how this works legally, but the SEC would say like, okay, we're going to create a roster of ticker symbols to implementations. And then when they do that, they're not going to like look to GitHub to maintain that list. They're going to use the U.S. Corporation Registry to maintain that list. That's what I think is going to happen.
Isn't that what BSV is foreshadowing or like what they foresee? Because they keep saying that we're the government regulated blockchain,
or the one that's ready to work with governments.
Everybody's kind of wanting this now. I mean, the guys, like you see this even with like, I don't know, Tron or something like that, where people want to spend their money marketing their blockchain in ways that require them to have some level of government authority over the blockchain. And like the exchanges, I don't know how they feel, but they have to want that too at some level, because right now they take on a liability like with issues of like splits and forks wherein like customers can sue and there's no guidance. So whatever they do is a risk, and that just means more legal costs and potential damages. So if the government were to like define what a blockchain's parameters are, then they don't have to absorb that risk.
And then what do you do in the sense of like Binance, where they claim that they're not in any country? It's a completely decentralized exchange with no central form of governance. And it's like, how on earth are your funds SAFU at that point? It's just like,
we could have done this. See, we grew too fast in a lot of ways. We could have done this smarter. We do need decentralized exchanges. That was something I thought everybody kind of knew a long time ago. Now you're not allowed to talk about that in various ways, but like you do need decentralized exchanges. And right now you have a major bottleneck in the sense that ACH access and SWIFT access are required in order to do non-trivial business. So that's a major Achilles heel for us. And nobody seems to want to tackle that problem. And if we don't tackle that problem, then crypto could very easily go the way of Liberty Gold or something like that. There was a time when I would have thought there was enough interest and willingness to sacrifice and duty in the space to where like you go to a local user group and we would trade. This was common back in the day. Somebody show up, they want $100 worth of Bitcoin, you sell it to them. Granted, that only scales to a point. You can't do that with $100,000, but there was at least a model where that kind of market could have happened. Now, I think we're kind of past that time, so I don't see that happening.
All right, so we're gonna have to go pretty soon, but I guess my last question, which relates to all this, is, Chris, since you're no longer very vocal in the crypto community, you still have a lot of investment in crypto, and you have a lot of opinions about this stuff, and you have a clarity on how it works, or how it's worked since you've been invested. Like how are you going to contribute now? I mean, what are you going to do are you thinking like you're just going to kind of slowly sell your stack and then move it into Nextdoor shares, or are you going to kind of continue to increase the value of crypto for yourself and maybe for other people, on how you see the future? What's the future of Derose?
Yeah, candidly, I don't have a sense of duty to the community anymore. I think the community has let me down in a few ways, and I don't blame the community for that. Like it's the community; it does whatever the hell it wants. It's fine.
They've let you down. Wow. Okay.
So, like
Hear
for
that,
me,
community?
for which say what?
I said, hear that, community? You let
Yeah, well, I
Derose
mean,
down.
I don't for the listener or whatever. Like, you don't have to do anything. Like, I don't know. Like, it's a lot of it is just it's nobody's fault. Yeah, there's no incentive to sacrifice for the community, for myself or anybody, unfortunately. So I'm very much of the number go up mentality at this point. Like this is Wall Street bets time, and if the
Okay,
community
yes.
if the community doesn't reward people for sacrificing, then it doesn't deserve sacrifice. That's okay. So for me, we've talked off camera or otherwise. I've put time with my talents, I suppose, automating a lot of my investment setup, and I'm happy just to keep a percentage of my net worth in the space, and rebalance regularly. And in terms of like doing stuff with my time, I spend it, I guess, on like my family. It's been rewarding. I don't know. I may do something else. I've been kind of wanting access to like equity. I've been wanting access to better equity opportunities. I haven't figured out how I want to do that yet, but I want to invest my gains in newer blockchains with perhaps other purposes.
So you think that, I mean, you're going to keep some of your investment still in crypto because you believe there's going to be another bubble, or you just think you never know, it's probably worth it? I mean,
I think you never know. It's probably worth it. That's what I think.
Okay.
I could totally see this thing going to the moon or going to zero. And in both cases, I want to make sure that I don't lose money,
Right.
and that I make some money as appropriate. So, like, and for anybody, like, you should really be wise about your investments. And index is a big part of what I do. It's a shame that nobody in the space wants to hear that message, because that message is maximally profitable to the individual. But I understand why nobody wants to hear that message, because it's not maximally profitable to like the herd mentality of Christian echoing. Yeah, exactly.
How do you get more followers if you're just indexing? It's like
and being honest with people. Damn, nobody wants to hear honesty.
No.
Indexing just means,
which is probably why you started to leave.
So when you say indexing, you mean specifically diversifying into the top cryptos that all look like they're going to have a future, right?
Yeah, top 10 by market cap is a really good bet. And I have my own picks outside of that. But top 10 by market cap, great bet. It's performed better than Bitcoin only for, I think, up till even now, but certainly for the vast, up since last time I checked, I think. Like, you would have made more money indexing than you would have just holding Bitcoin, which is a very much censored fact.
And do you have an algorithm that you run, or you just kind of eyeball it?
Well, now I do. Yes. But you can, like Panda Analytics and Shrimpy.io offer great tools to investors who don't want to, decentralize, which,
Gotcha.
basically,
We linked to those on the last time you were on.
Yeah.
It's cool to hear you talk about the
We'll link
Shrimpy.
to them again.
Yeah. So you own quite a bit of Tron then. Sounds like.
I have as little of anything as anyone will believe. That's my official
That's
answer.
right. You only bought one Bitcoin to begin it
Yes.
with. So cool. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, and thanks for doing our intro.
Yeah.
We totally want you to come back on in the future.
Sure, you guys are great.
When there's more excitement in the crypto community, which I'm sure there will be. There's always stuff coming in and out.
Always.
Michael, any other questions for Mr. Derose?
No, that's it. Thanks so much, man. I really appreciate your insight. It's always fun
having me,
talking to
guys.
you.
Yep. Let us know when you're in California.
We'll do.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. I'm going to stop the recording now.